Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids of the Week video. I thought I would mix one of these in while I'm continuing to go through your urban legends suggestions. So please keep them coming. I'm probably going to do a couple more throughout the week here, and I can't wait to get back to them. This particular random page from the cryptids.wikia.com website brought us in this case to a creature that has a very unique trait. It's something that's apparently found throughout a rarer set of creatures throughout the earth, but it all has to do with the fact that if you were to stick a creature on an island, then it'll develop a very unique characteristic. More on that here in a minute, but it has to do with this. You're looking at it now. This is a creature that's called, it doesn't have a scientific name, but it has more of a term associated with it. It's called the giant Indian bipedal lizard. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this unique cryptid. So what is this giant Indian bipedal lizard? Well, it's a creature that's been around for some time. At least its first sighting was back in the early 1940s, but for all intents and purposes, especially considering the trait that I'll talk about here in a minute, it's been around for much longer. It has to be, considering its very unique characteristic. As far as its physical aspects, think of it as basically like a giant lizard, like a giant gecko type lizard. If you wanted to get more scientific, it could be known as the fan-throated lizard, which has a scientific term known as the Satana ponticeriana. Boy, that's a unique name. But yes, if you go there to India, you'll find that tinier version of the lizard. But think of it like that, but larger. And that's all it is. That's all it is. It's this larger version of the fan-throated lizard. If you wanted to compare it, in fact, to another creature of size there in India, you can find the rusty spotted cat also in India, and both of them seem to be around the same height. So pretty interesting when you think about it, because we all know like the tiny lizards that permeate throughout, in this case, the U.S., but imagine those supersized, about the size of a cat, maybe even larger, and that's what you have here. And yes, indeed, just like the fan-throated lizard, it too has a very unique fan on its throat. This is something that has a huge amount of variations of colors, apparently from its sighting. It can be from blue, also black, also red, all of course done as a way to ensure that it can attract as much mates as possible there from its animal kingdom. So it's always that way when it comes to the animal world. It'll be the males having these physical characteristics, so that way they can ensure to attract the most mates possible. Its legs are considered pretty thin. The rest of its body is going to be like a stale brown. It also has these long fingers with tiny claws on them. The other characteristic that stands out is this: it runs at a very fast speed, and when it does so as bipedalism. That's that unique trait where it goes on its hind legs and runs almost like a human would. I mean, I've seen that kind of stuff in action on video, not in person, but you've seen those tiny lizards whenever they run really fast, that they run on their hind legs. I remember one time somebody calling them the Jesus Christ lizards, because not only can they run so fast, they run on top of water, but whenever they run that fast by people, it scares people or surprises them so fast that they scream out loud, Jesus Christ. That's essentially why it's called that. But as far as its sighting, it has to do with this. Back in 1941, there was a gentleman by the name of M.A. Smith who was doing, or some kind of book, at least he was gathering data for it, and it was called The Fauna of British India, Reptilia and Amphibia. And he was there in India recording these things. And he went specifically to an area there, Bombay, or some of the islands surrounding that area, and that's where he found this lizard. That's where he described it, actually, in person. He stated that it's about 40 centimeters in total length. It has a tail about 1.5 times the size of its head and body. It has no real large scales associated with it. It just looks, again, like a larger version of the other lizard I mentioned earlier. And he went on to explain this very unique characteristic of like why this would be much larger than its cousins. And it makes sense when you think about it. It has to do with this. Have any of y'all ever heard of the term of island gigantism? I've kind of heard of it, but I've never looked into much detail. But it's this. If you were to take a creature of any sort and place it, instead of, let's say, on a regular piece of large land, but instead place it on an island, over a certain time period, that creature will undoubtedly grow larger and larger. And it's because of this. Whenever you're stuck, in this case, or on an isolated place, like in this case on an island, there has to be more of a survival of the fittest. It's almost like an island rule. It's the idea that that you're not going to have these animals being able to escape if they have larger animals chasing them all the time. So they, in turn, kind of have to be larger. They have to be larger than some of their other brethren. And so when that happens, this island gigantism, slowly over time, I mean, it's not going to be something where it's just next generation type stuff. No, this is probably going to be hundreds of years in the making. That's what I was mentioning earlier. That sighting of 1941 was at least the first physical sighting, but this thing, no doubt, was around a much longer, considering how long this would take. But if that happens, it takes generations and generations of the cycle in order for this creature to grow larger and larger. It all is tied into that island rule. Animals rule on that island, the larger ones rule the smaller ones. So it's all about smaller species having to evolve to larger bodies in order to make sure that they survive. And it makes sense, doesn't it? That's what would have happened to this giant Indian bipedal lizard. Wherever it is there in India, more specifically the areas there around Bombay, then you have in this case this creature being there and growing larger and larger. Unfortunately, no single, I guess, video, photo, anything along those lines seem to have come across it. You would think that with its very special, unique coloring on its fan throat, that it would have more sightings. But no, wherever it's at, it seems to definitely have secluded environments. Like, it seems to be able to really hide from people or other animals as well. And then that way it just continues to live out its life. Who knows? It may have been down to a couple of lizards left, and then that's it. They went extinct. But at least during that time period there in the 1940s, they were able to be sighted by this gentleman. So, but that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with the giant bipedal lizards, or the giant Indian bipedal lizards. If anybody has any more info, something you might have missed, anyone around that area there in India, maybe you might have heard of someone that have sighted this creature, that'd be a good place here to place comments on it as well. I'm wondering if it's still out there somewhere in Bombay. If so, this will be a creature not to be really messed with, because imagine something like that larger than the size of a cat, and you could see that this thing, especially the speed that it has, it won't kill anybody, no doubt, but it could cause some harm, especially with its claws that it has too, and again the speed that it runs with. But it's still something that, no doubt, I'm wondering if it's still out there in this world too. Also, what do you guys think about that notion there involving island gigantism? Could that explain some other cryptids out there in this world too? It kind of makes sense. I would tend to agree that yes, there could be something to that theory as well. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.